Chapter 3, 1975 to 1978. England, 1975. I was nervous as my parents drove me to the airport for my flight to London. When I was 10 years old, I had traveled to Norway with a 20-year-old Norwegian girl who had lived with our family for 2 years. I went with her on one of her visits home, and on our way we went to London, Paris, and Copenhagen. London was a place that represented all that was exotic and wonderful to me, and memories of my short visit long ago triggered my imagination about the wonders of this city. Now I was returning to audition for acting schools and to explore the city more, all on my own. I had my big flowered suitcase full of clothes and a small backpack with my necessities, my passport, audition scripts, books, notepads, and pens. I checked in for my flight and said goodbye to my mom and dad when it was time to board. I read and slept on the plane, and before I knew it, we were landing. I walked off the airplane and I felt a shift. Peace flowed through me, washing away all my fears of solo travel. Walking through this airport is not scary, and finding my way to the city is just a series of steps, and none of them are scary, I thought to myself. Everything I am doing here is just more and more steps, and I can do all these steps and nothing feels scary if I pay attention to what I'm doing right now. In the next few weeks of auditions, the best friend I met was Kent. He was another guest at the hotel I was staying in, the Lancaster Gate Hotel, from the U.S., and traveling with his mother and brother. He was 21 years old. After spending time having adventures like riding the tube together one dark morning to explore a fish market when it opened at dawn, or just sitting in the park talking with him, I was able to recognize just how lonely I had been feeling. I hadn't been unhappy, but I had been lonely. I loved knowing Kent, and he shared with me that he had a short career as a professional ballet dancer, but his knee had been badly injured and his career ended abruptly. He said this time in England was a transition for him. He helped me see that I was in a transition too. We became lifelong friends. The staff at the Lancaster Gate Hotel offered me a job, and I imagined what my life would be like living in London, going to school and working. My most important audition came up, and as I walked to it, I missed Andy. I wondered what it would be like if he moved here, as he had said he might. I thought about us together, walking hand in hand through this wonderful old city and going on ski trips together. My imaginings did not include much about being a student. I pictured being held in Andy's arms and longed for his touch. The Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, or RADA for short, audition required a piece from Shakespeare, and I had chosen something from The Taming of the Shrew. I knew it well and was pretty confident about performing it after successfully auditioning at other schools the past few weeks. I arrived at the RADA building. It was large and multi-storied, and a nice British lady directed me to the audition waiting area. I was early, and so were a lot of other kids. Some were quiet and focused on their scripts, while others were quietly chatting. I smiled at a young woman who caught my eye, and she came over. "I'm Mari. Where are you from?" "America," I answered. "Oh, so far away," she exclaimed. "Is it your first time in London?" I shook my head no. "This is my first time in London," she said, "and I love it. My village is in the north, and this is my only chance to get out of there. I have to be accepted." "Well," I said, "if you're not accepted, there are a lot of other opportunities in London and other school options." "Not for me," Mari said. "My family saved for a long time to get me here, and if I don't get accepted with full tuition paid, then I'll have to go home and work at our family pub for my career." "There are a lot of other schools you could apply to," I countered. "RADA is pretty competitive, and being rejected doesn't mean you have no talent." "I'm not worried about talent," she told me. "This is my one and only chance to live the life I want." "How old are you?" I asked. 16, she said. "What piece are you doing?" I asked her. "Kate's monologue in The Taming of the Shrew," she answered. "Me too," I said, and just then my name was called. There were several people sitting at a table in the audition room, and I felt at ease answering their questions about where I was from and what my goals were. Somehow my nerves had completely settled down, and when it was time for me to do my piece, I felt like I aced it. I walked out feeling confident. The streets of London were the perfect place for me to walk out my feelings. Whatever the outcome of my audition turned out to be, I was questioning if I really wanted to act anymore. Acting had been my path, my goal, my passion since I was in 7th grade, but something in my conversation with Mari had triggered something. I wondered if my life's course was changing directions. I thought about my friend Kent and how he was in the process of discovering his next steps. I felt a new sense of understanding after that audition. Being around kids my own age and seeing how we were all somewhat uncertain about our goals helped me embrace my own turning point. I thought about Andy and how much I missed him, and I hoped I hadn't been gone too long again and jeopardized the feelings we had for each other. I thought about skiing and how the mountains felt more like home to me than any other place I'd been. I thought about Mari, and I sort of wanted her to have a place at Rada instead of me. I walked through the park feeling lighter and happier. I ran into the Lancaster Gate Hotel looking for Kent, but he wasn't there. Even though I couldn't talk through these feelings with him, I knew that my course had shifted. England had changed me, and I was uncertain about moving there to attend theater school. I never ended up learning what happened to Mari, but I'm forever grateful I ran into her that day. No matter what my audition results were, I had already begun setting those dreams aside and embracing the love Andy and I shared and the life we had started building together. Everything in my life was now differentiated by whether it happened before or after I met Andy. This man had become a person I couldn't imagine living without. I had loved my trip abroad, but the whole idea of moving to London didn't feel right to me anymore, and college in Boston felt off the table, given that it didn't have any possibility of including Andy. My goal of living in England or Boston had been put into motion before I met Andy. While in England, I had come to understand that rather than acting being my life's blood, it was a way to escape from a life where I felt like I didn't fit in. The assumptions in the society where I grew up included going to college, working a job suitable for women at the time, secretary, nurse, accountant, getting married, living in a suburb, and joining a country club. I had always loved and felt like I belonged with my family, but I had never felt at home in the culture and society they lived in. Now I had found a sense of community alongside the man I loved. I was examining my life closely and hoping my best option would become apparent. If I wasn't going to move to England for acting school, that left only Boston unresolved. I only wanted to move there to please my parents. Eventually, I declined college in Boston and flew back to Catalina and Andy. We really began our life together then, and my parents let go of their attachment to the dreams I had made for my life while in their care. I was free-falling, and I landed in Catalina with Andy. Catalina is loveliest in autumn. Andy had saved quite a lot of money while I had been traveling, and when I returned to the island, I worked as much as I could to save a lot too. It was much less crowded now that summer was over, and we spent our days in bliss. The warm Santa Ana winds blew at that time of the year, and the isthmus was a magnificent setting for our friendship to deepen and our love to grow. In November, we returned to Aspen and had the good fortune of being able to live together again in the same blue Victorian house we had lived in the year before. I was to be a ski instructor again, and Andy had enough savings to have another winter just skiing without full-time work. We had a couple of weeks before my job started, and our living situation had fallen into place so easily that we found ourselves with time on our hands. Aspen was full of artists, skiers, athletes, musicians, business owners, highly educated taxi drivers and dishwashers, career ski patrollers, and filmmakers. There were a macrobiotic cafe and juice bar, bookstores that specialized in philosophical authors, and ski shops owned by past Olympic champions. There was one grocery store where everybody shopped, and it was impossible to go there and not be social because there was always a friend in one of the aisles. We all walked around town, and there was a free public bus system that was available if there was a hurry. We were both caught up in the fun and excitement of being part of this community. Our winter was filled with skiing, working, and time spent with friends. When spring arrived, Andy left for Avalon instead of the Isthmus on Catalina Island. He was arriving early to help the owners of the restaurant where he had a job to prepare for their opening. I planned on joining him after ski season ended. I stayed in our friend's barn that was renovated on the inside and a falling down wreck on the exterior. I loved the feeling of walking toward this dilapidated structure finding the secret entryway and letting myself into the house within the barn. One early morning, I was awakened by Stuart, our artist friend who had renovated the barn, banging on the wall below. "Are you awake? Can I come up?" His head poked in from the trapdoor entry, and he placed a bag from the bakery on the floor before hoisting himself up. "I have an idea I want to run by you," he said. "I want to start a shop making and selling bronze jewelry, like some friends of mine here have in Aspen, but in Avalon. I need an assistant and thought maybe you would want to do this with me." I responded with an immediate yes. I needed a job, and this sounded fun. Stuart had arranged for one of his friends who worked at the Aspen bronze jewelry shop to teach us the basics of using a torch and doing the polishing that turned the jewelry from a dull bronze color to a bright gold. I spent the rest of my days in Aspen learning how to weld with an oxyacetylene torch and practicing the initial skills for making jewelry. Stuart was already a welder and had a workbench set up in the barn. After he showed me the steps for safely working with a torch, I practiced every day. I found it difficult to get the metal to flow. I would heat the long metal rods to their melting point and try to lay down the liquid bronze into a line on the cast iron plate I was working on. The flame was mesmerizing, and I enjoyed the amount of concentration the work required. I loved the process, and over the next 2 weeks, I was able to make rudimentary pieces of bronze scraps stuck together. I couldn't yet make anything that could have been sold, but I was making some progress and looking forward to my new summer job. The time came to leave Aspen and begin driving to Catalina. Stuart and I traveled in Andy's international travel-all van that had been passed down to him from his father. Stuart had packed it to the gills with belongings Andy had left behind in Aspen and all the supplies Stuart needed to open a bronze shop on the island. There was barely enough room in the front seat for the two of us, especially because we were traveling with an African gray parrot named Harry, whose large cage sat between us. Andy and I had purchased Harry from Ed, our pet shop owner. We didn't know its gender, but called the bird Harry. Andy had always dreamed of sailing a boat around the world with a parrot. And while we couldn't quite afford to do that yet, we could at least afford the parrot. Avalon, 1975. We arrived in Avalon by boat. The town was completely different from where we had lived at the Isthmus. It was a real town, not a settlement, and glittered with all sorts of historic houses and buildings built into the hills surrounding the crescent-shaped bay. My first thought was that it looked like Greece, classic and quaint. Andy met us at the landing dock, and we all walked together to Hotel St. Catherine, where the new restaurant was and where we were going to live. Andy and I were thrilled to see each other. He looked tan, and his blue eyes sparkled with love for me and the excitement of being together again. Closer inspection of Avalon revealed some dilapidation mixed with the class. Hotel St. Catherine seemed to lean a bit more toward the dilapidated end of the spectrum. My arrival at the room on the upper floor where Andy was staying confirmed that impression. However, nothing could dampen my happiness of being with Andy, not even an ugly room. That first week was busy. Our belongings and all the tools and materials Stuart had brought to build the bronze shop arrived behind us on a freight boat. Some friends of ours from Aspen were also hired at the restaurant and began arriving too. The Hotel Catherine was filling up with them. The new restaurant was almost ready to open, and everybody was scrambling with all the preparations. I wasn't going to be working at the restaurant and couldn't begin at the bronze shop until it was built. It was really fun having an immediate community in a new place. I had time to explore our new town and absolutely loved where Stuart's and my bronze shop was going to be. Ours was one of about a dozen shop spaces in a white stucco Spanish-style round building. There was a plan to have live music playing in the center courtyard that all the shops faced as the season got going. Stuart was working day and night, sleeping in the shop to try to get us open as soon as possible. The restaurant opened successfully, and my evenings felt a bit dull because all my friends were working and my shop wasn't open. One afternoon, I found myself sitting alone at the waterfront, daydreaming to pass the time. "Is that you, Michelle?" A voice cut through my thoughts. It was Terry from the Isthmus Village. He was one of the cool people who had made me feel at home there the previous summer. Terry was a surfing, boating, ocean-loving guy. He had lived at the Isthmus on a 30-foot lifeboat that he had salvaged and turned into a fantasy home. The boat looked like a small ark, and he had made a canvas roof that covered a comfortable living space we were all in awe of. "What are you doing here?" he asked me. Business people didn't generally spend much time in Avalon. I explained how Art and Nancy, the managers at the Isthmus restaurant, were starting their own restaurant here. Andy had followed them, and I had followed Andy, but was starting a different business with a friend. It felt great to share all this with Terry. I'm leaving the island for a while, he told me. I'm heading to Montana, and I'm looking for someone to pass on my lifeboat home to. Are you and Andy interested? Of course, I replied. Where is it, though? It's right over there, he pointed. It's docked in the boatyard and needs some work. I'd love to give it to you two if you want it. We walked the few blocks to the boatyard and climbed up the ladder to the top deck. It was dusk, and I couldn't see all the dirt he told me needed to be scrubbed or the repairs that needed to be made. I heard Terry's words, but I saw only the magical dream of a home that Andy and I could turn this boat into. I was excited and couldn't wait to show Andy, and hoped so much that he would want to live there too. It would change everything for the better to live in our own place instead of the dingy room we now occupied. I thought Harry, our parrot, would love it too. The next day, after Andy had proved to be just as excited as I was about this boat, we accepted Terry's offer and started 2 busy weeks of cleaning and repairing our new home. Art and Nancy gave us a small stove and oven, and we bought a propane bottle to fuel them. We found a dresser at a second-hand store and a mattress. We bought a kerosene lantern and put up curtains on some of the built-in shelves. We painted the plank floor a light blue, and most of the counters white. Harry's cage sat on one of them. The project was fun, and we moved onto the boat as soon as we could. I loved pulling the ladder up at night and feeling safe and cozy in our home. Eventually, the Catalina Bronze Company opened, and then I was busy every day trying to make things that would sell. I had to work with my very limited skills, creating simple bracelet designs. The torch work took extreme focus. Stuart had built the shop so 2 people could work on torches side by side, and potential customers could watch the process through a plexiglass window. I was thrilled every time someone would buy a bracelet I had made. I never considered that I could make something that people would recognize as beautiful and pay money to have. It was heady stuff for me, although there wasn't much time to get caught up in those feelings, since I always had to focus on making more pieces. Andy was spending quite a lot of time at Catalina Bronze Company. More often than not, he took the second demonstrator seat beside mine instead of Stuart. Andy loved making things, and he was playing around with making rings. Ironically, Stuart never seemed to take to the actual torchwork and jewelry-making process, but instead loved creating the business and the space housing it. After about a month, the restaurant was not having much success, and soon Andy quit his job as head waiter and became the 3rd member of Catalina Bronze Company. It was also time to launch our lifeboat home into the ocean. This was a big day, and a crowd of locals gathered at the dock as our metal lifeboat had large straps wrapped around it and was attached to a hoist. We had towed it to the dock earlier and secured our stuff as best as we could. We put our parrot in his cage, our kitchen pots, and our dresser drawers on the floor. The crane with the hoist lifted our boat up high in the air and then down to the waiting water. Harry was squawking and whistling the whole time. We prayed there would be no leaks. Our friend who drove the shore boat was waiting and attached the rope Andy had tied to our bow to his stern and began towing our boat home across the harbor toward the spot where we wanted to anchor. Andy and I boarded a different shore boat and followed the parade. After reaching our destination, which was in the open sea but close to shore in the cove next to Avalon Harbor called Descanso Bay, we climbed onto our lifeboat and dropped the anchor. A diver friend dove down and wrapped the anchor chain around and around a huge rock at the bottom of the sea. That summer was a dream. We awakened on our boat every morning after being gently rocked each night into the deepest sleep I had ever experienced. We did yoga and ate breakfast before rowing our dinghy to shore. We walked to the shop, stopping on the way to use the public toilets, and then opened up the shop and worked from 10 until 2, when Stuart took over. At 2, Andy and I went running in the hills of Avalon for an hour, showered at the public shower house, and then relaxed and ate dinner. We discovered a great sandwich shop and often enjoyed the Catalina Special, which was whole grain bread with avocado, cream cheese, black olives, and alfalfa sprouts. A young couple, Kathy and Malcolm, were the owners of the sandwich shop, and we became friendly with them since we ate there almost every day. At 6 every evening, we relieved Stuart and ran the shop until 10, when we'd walk to our rowboat and row home. Oh, it was the best feeling to sit and be rowed by Andy through the black ocean under the bright stars. Most nights our oars would cause the phenomenon called phosphorescence, hitting tiny plankton that emitted light in response. What we saw was a mystical glow when our oars swooped through the water. Every once in a while, a tourist boat crossed our path. People paid to go on night cruises to see the flying fish. When the boat shined a spotlight out at the sea, it would trigger a show. These fish had small wings and could jump out of the water and then fly about 150 feet before going under again. Many times the light crossed over us and we had to beat off fish that sailed right into our boat. We would laugh uncontrollably while throwing fish out of our rowboat, sure we were providing an additional spectacle for the tourists. Our summer was fun and idyllic. By the time autumn rolled around, Andy and I were both very good at making bronze jewelry. Andy had an idea that we would save our earnings from the shop and buy a sailboat and cruise to the South Pacific. That became our dream. Our plan was first to move to San Francisco, close to Andy's dad, George. Andy would accept the job he had been offered by George to be an assistant installing high-quality interior shutters into designer homes and buildings. We learned that Kathy and Malcolm were moving to a house in Larkspur, California, which was just across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. They needed someone to rent the second bedroom, and we were grateful to take that place. We left Catalina Braun's company, passed our boat home to Stewart, and moved to Larkspur on the first day of October, 1975. Our house was an adorable one-story, two-bedroom bungalow right across from the post office. We loved it immediately and moved in with high hopes we would find financial success and make our sailboat dream a reality. Only one thing weighed on me. I need to get married, I told Andy. We were madly in love, had gotten to know each other's characters, had a goal of buying a sailboat and sailing around the world, and we owned a parrot together. We both wanted kids one day. Andy had a job with his dad, and we lived in a great house. Why not get married too? I don't want a church wedding, Andy said. It would give the wrong idea to your family, because I'm not religious the same way they are, but I am happy to marry you any other way. We chose the Marin County Civic Center, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was not the wedding of my dreams, which would have taken place outside in a green mountain meadow with horses, but it was our wedding, and I was happy. More importantly, my family was happy, and now Andy and I could get on with our lives with the acceptance I had craved from them. Guatemala, 1976. In the years of splitting time between being jewelry artists and ski adventurers, our dream of buying a boat was our priority. During our first 2 years of marriage, all our efforts went toward fulfilling this goal. After saving every possible dollar and negotiating with a boat owner and builder in Guatemala, we ended up buying a trimaran sailboat with 2 partners, Andy's brother and our friend Bill, and sailing our boat from Guatemala to Florida. The plan was for one of our partners to live on the boat while we all worked to pay off the debt from the purchase until we could afford to embark on a bigger sailing trip. Traveling to Guatemala by train, chicken bus, and finally canoe to see the boat before buying it was a magnificent adventure itself. Choosing to buy the boat after living on it for a month and learning to sail it from the remarkable man who built it and had sailed it twice around the world was an experience of a lifetime. But all these fabulous days paled in comparison to actually sailing across the Gulf of Mexico on this incomparable boat. Our crew consisted of myself and Andy, Bill, and Mark, the builder and soon-to-be previous owner of Talofiafaoy, the boat we were buying. The name means I love you in Samoan and seemed auspicious. The 4 of us left at night under a full moon and motored down the river toward the open sea. River dolphins saw us off, swimming gracefully behind our boat. At one point we anchored and skinny dipped at a natural hot spring under the moonlight. When we hit the open ocean waves, we all got seasick, but my sickness was the least intense and shortest lived. When we landed at Puerto Barrios to pick up some supplies, we all felt wobbly on land as we slowly acclimated to being sailors. I learned that sailing a 37-foot boat required a lot of work all the time, and I loved it. Our boat had an automatic steering apparatus that we used, but someone had to keep checking that we were on course, and we often had to adjust sails, tighten or loosen lines. I was the main cook. Galley organization and food prep took a lot of my time. Because we were crossing shipping lanes, we always had night watches. No one wanted to take the chance of being run over by an unaware, gigantic freighter. We took turns lazing in the nets that stretched between the hulls and watching the ever-changing water and sky. The guys would jump off the front of the boat and grab the rope that trailed off the stern after the boat sailed over them. I never did that. I felt it was too risky to maybe miss the rope and be stranded in the open sea with no land in sight and our boat sailing away from me. Halfway through our voyage, a storm came. We had 2 days of giant waves and constant manual steering. Rain pelted down, and the starry night skies left us in exchange for utter darkness and strong winds. Andy and Bill got extremely seasick. We all had to live with the smell of vomit competing with the fresh salt air. They became mostly bedridden, so Mark and I did the work. Mark had a long-time sailor's stomach of steel, and apparently my body had acclimated to the sea because after that first day, I never got seasick again. Once, as our boat was being tossed around in huge waves, I asked Andy, "Should I be afraid?" He replied, "If you want." I had never realized fear could be a choice. Mark became exhausted from doing so much. One of my strongest memories from that time is when he had to rest, and I was the sole person awake on a stormy night watch. It was raining steadily and hard to see. Big waves carried our boat up, 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 and then down, down, down. I was dry under my foul-weather jacket and hood and seriously focused on the compass and gripping the large wheel to keep us on course. It was an experience of learning to trust myself and my ability to do whatever was needed for our survival. Within the raging storm that we were stuck in, I was able to access a peace. The more I dug into my reserves of endurance and strength, the more I found I had. When we sailed out of that storm, we were all grateful for a day of doldrums and drying out in a calm sea. Our lives once again seemed charmed with happiness, fun, prosperity, and adventure. My best experience was when a wild dolphin found us in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico and interacted with me as I hung my feet over the edge of the bow. After we arrived safely in Florida, Bill told us he wasn't cut out for sailing, and he dropped out as a partner. Andy's brother lived on our boat for a year but was not able to help pay for it. Andy and I were solely responsible, and eventually our dreams fell apart. Arizona, 1978. We dove into selling our bronze jewelry. At one of our art shows, I met a palm reader. We were in Tucson, Arizona at a fair that took place along the street that was closed to traffic for many blocks. We were placed at one end of this long show next to people selling African drums. The constant drumming created a vortex of wild, enthusiastic energy that swirled around our booth. We had great sales that day, and our own energy was pretty high. Andy and I took turns taking occasional breaks to eat or rest from the busy atmosphere. On one of my breaks, I was enchanted by a tiny hand-built house on a trailer. An older woman sat on a stool outside the doorway. She was small, but stood out, her long gray hair hanging unbound, and a colorful handmade skirt swirling around her ankles in the breeze. A sign next to her read, "Palm reading, $10. There was a long line, and I took a place in it. When my term came, I remember feeling her focused intensity as she read my life's decades. "Your 20s are all about discovery," she told me. "You know who you are and have known for a while, but you will be exploring different possibilities to discover what path is to be. Your 30s are going to be the time when your path becomes clear. You will understand your destiny more completely and will see the work you are meant to do. Your 40s will be marked by accomplishment. You will get a lot done and complete many projects, both artistic and personal. Your 50s..." At this point, my attention was beginning to waver because my 50s seemed light years away and unimaginable, but her facial expression of combined shock and amazement quickly brought my interest back. "Your 50s are hard to explain," she hesitated. "It will be a time that will be so magic and wonder-filled that your earlier years will seem dull by comparison. Your 50s are a time when you will shine and realize all your dreams. Your 50s are unlike any decade I've ever read. You are a fortunate soul." I don't know if I had paid another $10 if she would have continued, but since I could hardly imagine being 50 anyway, and it had ended on such a high note, I chose to walk away. I haven't ever had my palm read again, and I am not the type to seek out fortune-telling or card reading because I love the mystery so much. Still, I always held on to the idea that in one way or another, my 50s would be remarkable.